Okay, hi everyone. Like I mentioned, this is the second part of the literacy narratives. I didn't want to make a slideshow that had 16 or 17 slides. I just thought it would be better to divide it into two parts. So here is the second part. The first slide is about pre-writing, which is one of the processes of writing that you should be familiar with and know about. Another way to think about pre-writing is generating ideas. So I will produce a lecture for chapter 29 called Generating Ideas in Text. You can go ahead and review chapter 29 because in that chapter and in the lecture, I discuss several ways to pre-write for a paper, and those are all listed there. Um, if you're stuck on topic ideas, you can use one or more of these pre-writing processes for generating ideas. If you are stuck while you're writing your paper on details, examples, introduction, conclusion, then you can use any of the processes to help with that. So, listing, free writing, and clustering and mapping are the three most common types of pre-writing. Another way to think that you may have heard the word pre-writing is brainstorming. Um, Listing out ideas just as quickly as you can in a long list of words or phrases is something that a lot of people do in life, not just for papers, but listing as a way of brainstorming. Free writing, of course, is um, writing for about an 8 to 10 minute time span without stopping. So, writing full, complete sentences. Sometimes people actually turn off their computer screens while they're doing this. So that way they're not tempted to go back and read what they've already written because free writing is supposed to be a non rereading exercise. It's nothing that anyone will grade necessarily, although your teachers might see your free writing processes. But it's a way to generate ideas for your paper. And then to the right here is an example of a cluster or a brainstorming. It's not really, I mean, not brainstorming, a cluster or a map. I just found an illustration of this. It's not a map of anything necessarily that we'll be doing, but it's certainly a visual way, if you're a visual learner, to get pre writing and generating ideas for your text. So, next is what to consider as you start to draft your paper. You've generated ideas, now you have to sit down and draft. So think about setting. Where are you? In what time period? What is your age? Describe the setting a little bit for us. What do you hear and see? What do you smell, taste, feel? These are all sensory details. Think about characters in your narrative. Who else is present in the story? What are their facial expressions, ways of speaking, dress, movements, etc.? Think about writing dialogue. Dialogue is not required in this paper, but it can certainly enhance interactions and it can help move the plot along. So you're writing a story. Dialogue is always appreciated when you write a story, as well as other characters who are part of this literacy. So in the automotive literacy, I know I keep bringing that one up, but that's a fairly short one in our text, and it's also written by a student. So those two are what you have in common for this particular paper. She brings up her own family as characters, and then, of course, she brings up the character of the woman customer who yells at her because she's at the front and she can't answer any of the questions that the woman has. Okay, what happened is the heart of a good narrative. So you're describing the action, of course, using descriptions, vantage point, sensory details, as we've already discussed, and dominant impressions. There are two kinds of description you'll use. An objective description, which is one uncolored by opinion or emotion, and then a subjective description, which is a type of description vividly colored with your opinion and or emotion. Think about your vantage point or where you are located in relation to what you're describing. It can be stationary or it can be moving. So the vantage point is where you are situated or where you're located. And then finally, dominant impression is very important. What is the overall feeling that the details add up to in your piece? That is the dominant impression. And the dominant impression is related to the words you use, the story you tell, and the tone you take. So the dominant impression we get of Rebel music, for instance, is one of discovery and joy, and almost a religious experience when he discovers finally how classical music can actually sound and how it can make him feel. Even though the author had played classical music before, he was just a middling piano player. He didn't, as an adolescent, really think about how it made him feel until he heard something, until he heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony that really had this huge impression on him. And the dominant impression, then, he relays that to us as one of such profound importance that he therefore makes composition and music his entire career as a result of listening to that and becoming ensconced in classical music. So the most important part of a narrative is its significance, and remember, that'll be the last paragraph or two of your paper. How did this literacy experience change you? How did it affect you? What aspects of your life now can you trace to this experience? How might your life have turned out differently if this event didn't happen? Why does this story matter to you? And finally, why does it matter to your audience? Those are all very important. So the right or wrong identity, for instance, that's also a student-written paper, but it's very long. It's much longer than what you'll be writing for this class. But still, we understand the significance of it as her sense of ambiguity, meaning her sense of uncertainty about herself as a writer. She had been told her whole life that she was a writer. And as she begins writing and as she thinks about herself as a writer and as she ponders it almost philosophically, she begins to wonder how she is actually a writer and if she's an imposter, essentially. And all of that talks about how it matters to her, how it affects you, how her entire life is being traced to that experience. So all of those things are part of her identity, right or wrong identity. And the significance of all of these literacy narratives is apparent as we read them. Here, I've talked about this throughout the slideshow, but I've put in a little very, very minimal detail the significance in the essays that we read. So in Right or Wrong Identity, she questioned and continues to question herself as a writer, since she believes that everyone has only one identity, and she wonders if hers is truly a writer. In Se Habla Español, she feels less attached to her Latin roots today, since she cannot speak Spanish, even though she is of Guatemalan heritage, and that she tries but struggles to learn the Spanish language. And the significance to her and the significance to us both is her frustration and her disappointment in herself and her lack of being able to fulfill herself as a woman and as an adult because she doesn't have that connection with her language. Automotive literacy. Although the writer's family are mechanics and own an auto repair shop, she writes about an experience that revealed how she is illiterate in her family business. And rebel music. Even though he had played classical music before and worked as a musician, he reveals the moment in his adolescence when he actually began to appreciate and understand classical music, which began his lifelong journey as a classical musician and composer. So all of those show us the stance and the significance and why they wrote them. They wrote them for themselves, but they also wrote them for us so that we can not only learn about them, but perhaps relate it to something similar in our own lives. So choose one of the following ways to organize your draft. These are all reproduced in our book, but there are 3 different ways that you can organize your draft. Most people choose this first way, and any one of these ways can get a good grade, so don't think that one is better than another. You start with introducing your story. Then you describe the setting, the people, the story itself, and then the ending explains how the story was resolved and its significance. You could also begin in the middle. Start in the middle of the action with enough information to let the audience know what is happening. Fill in the details, setting, people, and actions. And then finally clarify how the situation was resolved and its significance. So the ending is the same in both the first and the second way to organize. And then a third way is to begin at the end. Start at the end of the story, tell how it ends, and then introduce the subject. Go back to the beginning, discuss people, setting, and what happens, and then explain the story's resolution and significance. So note that resolution and significance in all 3 of these occur at the end of the paper. Usually the end is the most important thing. It's what we remember most. But the way that these stories are set up are all a little bit different. Finally, after or before writing your first draft, come up with a title. Sometimes it's easier to write a title after you have written the draft. And consider if you would like to include visuals, headings, pictures, which constitute the media and design of your paper. That is not necessary, like I said earlier, but it may be something that you want to do as a writer to help us. So anyway, these are the 2 slides on literacy narratives, defining them, explaining them, talking about examples, and how you should proceed in starting your pre-writing, generating ideas, and then actually drafting your paper. All right, bye-bye.